Welcome to a gloomy, overcast day in Russia. It's raining a little bit and I had planned to go and make a video in a different place about a different topic, but because of the weather I don't really want to be out there in the open where it's windy and rainy. So here we are, walking around the city centre in the pedestrian zone. And the reason we're in the pedestrian zone too, I know you've seen this in other videos of mine already and been to this location, but because right now Russians are still driving their cars with their winter tyres. They haven't changed to the summer tyres yet, and those winter tyres have these bits of grit in them to obviously help in the winter months in the snow and the ice. But because of that, and there's no snow or ice now, they're very loud on the road. So everywhere you walk, if a car's driving down the road, it's like a tractor's heading down the road. So today I want to talk about the things that Russians find strange about Americans. And I say Americans, really I'm talking about Americans and people living overseas outside of Russia. Everyone's always grouped into kind of one person, which is the American. If you're foreign in Russia, you walk down the street, you're speaking English, people will think you're American. I don't know why that is. Perhaps American tourists like to come to Russia, perhaps, but yet people will come up to me and say, you know, are you from America? Just a typical thing that people expect. I must be American. And in my comments, in my YouTube comments as well, people will make comments about America as if I should know about America because I speak English, so I'm American. So once a Russian person gets to know me and realizes I'm not an American but actually I'm from England, well then they'll say a couple of things that they feel sorry about for me. And the first one is that in England you can't fly the English flag. You can't be proud to be English. They don't get that. They're like, you're in England, you're from England. England's done so many amazing things around the world, and yet you cannot fly the English flag, because if you fly the English flag, then that's a sign that you're a fascist and a racist. And people don't get that, because in Russia people are extremely proud to be Russian. They have lots of things to be proud of. They love the Russian flag, just like in the US, how you guys love the American flag and have it everywhere. We have the Russian flag, the town flag, the Soviet flag, and they are flown with pride. The next thing that Russian people say to me as a British person is that they are shocked that British people are worried about celebrating their own culture and traditions because people might be offended that are essentially guests in Britain. They don't get that. They say, look, your culture is your culture. You should be able to celebrate your culture, and to hell with other people if they might not like it. They're not British, they're not from Britain. Why should Britain care about what other people think? And Russian people, because that is how they are. They are Russian, they love Russia, they love Russian culture, and they will celebrate all Russian traditions. And of course, every now and again, you know, certain headlines will reach Russia about situations that happen in the UK. Like not long ago, a story was quite popular here about the Easter bonnet parade being cancelled in a school because they didn't want to offend people that weren't considering themselves British, and therefore instead of having an Easter week they plan to have a refugee week in the place of the Easter week where everyone could be welcome. Russians don't get that. Russians just think that's insane, and they think that people who are guests in Britain should learn about British culture because they're moving to Britain, rather than Britain having to change its traditional celebrations because guests of the country might be offended. The next topic is also with regards to how British people or how European people and American people allow guests of their country to behave in a disrespectful way towards their country. Russian people do not get this at all. For instance, there is no way that a Russian person would allow me, a foreigner, to walk down the streets with a banner saying that I'm against Russia. That would not happen. It's impossible. That could not happen. But yet they see foreign people moving to the UK and then protesting and saying they don't like the UK and that they're against British traditions and culture, and going to the streets and arguing and protesting and making their own protests about their own religions and their own beliefs. Russian people cannot get around this. They're like, that is insane. We would never let this happen in Russia. It would not happen. But yet they see that Britain, that Europe, that America, they allow that to happen now. I guess, yes, free speech, right? You're allowed to do that. But at the same time, you're visiting a country and another culture, and yet you're complaining about that country and culture and traditions. One of these people look like chimney sweeps, don't they, because of the bronze, I guess, that's been used to make them. The next thing that Russian people do not get is the removal of monuments and statues that commemorate people of the history of the country. Again, they see this as other outsiders influencing how people in their own country should behave. They think it's shocking when in the UK or the US or in Europe, things that have happened and been celebrated throughout the history are suddenly no longer allowed. Perhaps they've decided that that person was perhaps racist or prejudiced and doesn't deserve to be, you know, kind of commemorated anymore, and therefore the statue or the, I don't know, whatever it is removed. Russians see that as crazy. Russians say, well, that was a different time and people thought and behaved differently, and this is a part of your history, and these statues should not be removed. That is just insane. You'll see in every Russian town Lenin. Now Lenin is there because Lenin is part of the Soviet history. The Soviet Union, was it good? Was it bad? That's for other people to decide. But Lenin is part of the history of this country, and therefore the statues remain. And it just bemuses Russians. They're like, how could you let this happen? Basically, essentially what they think is people are coming to the UK and then making British people feel guilty for acts that have happened throughout their history, and being told that they've got to rewrite the history to fit and to please the narratives of foreigners who are essentially guests. The next thing that Russians find absolutely ridiculous about America and about Europe is the fact that people are offended about literally anything. There's always people who are somehow offended by something that somebody said, and often the punishments for being offended, right, are huge, absolutely huge. If you're offended by what a political person says, then that person can lose their job and be sued, and often the amount of money that is compensated to the victim who is offended by the words of somebody is ridiculous, you know, just way out of proportion. A lot of Russians talk about the mayor of New York who was like sued for something like 70 million, like everything he had, right, because of a statement he made about people. That is just mental. Okay, the guy did something that wasn't nice, you know, punishment, £1 million, change the family, change the lives of the families that he said something bad about. But to, you know, have to pay like 70 million to put him in the poorhouse when he's, you know, accumulated that wealth throughout his whole life, they just find that insane. And this happens a lot in the US, right? You get people that are billionaires that have done really well throughout their life, and then suddenly there'll be people who say, well, you know, 20 years ago he did something bad to me and I want 10 million, you know, and then the next person will come out and say, yeah, he did that to me as well, 15 million, you know, and the next one will, you know, think, what the hell? It's crazy. Like, the punishment is always way worse than the crime. And, you know, if the crime deserved the huge punishment, that's fine. But the goal often seems to be, in Russian minds, is to find a way to make them guilty and then take as much from them as you possibly can. And That's a saying, right? There's a saying in the UK, where there's a blame, there's a claim. If someone hits you in the car in the UK, brilliant. Slight bump, neck injury, you're going to be claiming as much money out of that situation as possible, because where there's blame, there's a claim. The next thing that Russians find ridiculous about the US and a lot of Europe is the overweight and obesity problem. In the US, obviously, it's well known. They just think it's crazy. How can people get that overweight? Now, I've been guilty of binging on awful foods through my life. I'm on a diet at the moment. I've gone up and down with my weight. But in Russia, most people do some sort of sport. A lot of people do lots of different sports. They eat healthy as well. And that's one of the things, they eat healthily. Now, I've actually had a look at statistics, and it says that quite a lot of Russian people are overweight, but I don't see that on a daily basis. Most people are not overweight at all. And so it's very interesting to see where these statistics are coming from. But we all know that the American people typically are very overweight. You have in the US people who are perhaps really into sport, and then you have most people who are overweight, and there's some towns where the obesity problem is like an epidemic, and Russian people can't get that. They're just like, wow, that's crazy. Like my friends, they eat healthy food, right? My friends will very, very rarely ever eat fast food. I remember going to McDonald's, and we went through the drive-thru with a taxi driver, and he got to the window and he was like, yeah, give me some sort of sandwich, butterbread. And like, he didn't know what the items were on the menu. Now, I think in the UK and the US, everyone knows the items of a McDonald's menu, right? You all know a lot of the names of the products. And in the US, you guys have loads and loads of different fast food places that we don't have here. So yeah, I mean, that is something that Russians can't get their head around. They're like, why do Americans eat so much? And the portion sizes too. They've been to America, they've traveled, and they say the portion sizes are insane, and the free refills of the fizzy drinks and stuff, they're just like, what? That is crazy. It is something that Russians will never get to understand, because they try and eat healthy, whereas the opinion is that in the US especially, people are overweight. The next thing that Russian people do not get is how American children are encouraged to change their gender pre-puberty. It's just puberty, right? Before puberty. They think that's absolutely mental, and they think it's absolutely crazy that parents will say, yeah, you know, my son came home from school and he's been, you know, talking about being a girl for the last couple of weeks, and he really wants to be a girl, so we're thinking about having the operation. They think that that is just mentally ill. They don't understand how people can even consider that. Yes, in the school he learned about LGBT, right? Maybe some of his friends are considering doing that too. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a cowboy, right? I can remember playing cowboys and Indians all the time. Imagine if I played cowboys and Indians, and then my parents had said, well, he seems to like being the Indian a lot, so we're gonna have to try and change him. Russians don't get it. They think it's absolutely mental. They just think, you know, the people are crazy to even listen to the children, and it's going to be an epidemic. They just think it's insane. The next thing that Russian people really don't get is why so many homeless people live in tents in these downtown areas in the US, in the UK, in Canada. Now, they understand that these people are homeless, but at the same time, these countries are the ones that are the most outspoken on the world stage about how their country is better than Russia. And they think, well, I don't understand this. If their countries are so much better than Russia, why are their downtown areas so shockingly bad? And we've all seen the pictures of these downtown areas in Canada and in the US especially, where, you know, there's trash everywhere. It's the same in the UK, trash everywhere, people living in tents, people just openly using drugs on the street, a lot of people just like zombies. In the US there's huge opioid problems, all of this stuff, and they think, well, hang on a second, you guys are trying to teach the rest of the world how we should behave and how your countries are ideal, but we don't have this problem that you guys have. And this is almost like, you know, hypocrisy. That's how Russian people see it, because they just think, you know, my friends will go on holiday to European capitals and they'll be like, I went there, I'll never go there again. It was shocking. It was absolutely shocking. The city centre was dirty, trash everywhere, homeless people all over the place, immigrants just kind of sitting around, felt uncomfortable. They say it's shocking how these countries tell Russia how they should live, and they pick up bad points to promote in the Western media about Russia, and they have these huge problems themselves but act as if they don't have them. And that's something that Russians are shocked about. The same thing that kind of goes along with that is woke culture. Russian people are they just laugh at woke culture. They think it's a joke, because it is a joke, right? To have all of these people that are out on the street saying, we are against this, or we, you know, I don't know, what's the typical thing is that the rights of people of a certain, you know, sexual orientation and the pronouns that they use, like, oh, Russian people, I'm embarrassed by it. I really am embarrassed, because like, why do you need to do that? Just live your life and be happy. Why do you have to be this and say you're that? Okay, if you're this and that, fine, just do it. Why do you have to have parades about it and meet and shout about it and do all of this stuff? I don't understand why it's needed. I'm embarrassed about it, because Russians will say to me about the UK and say that it's crazy there because of this stuff, and what can I say? It's true, right? They just think it's a load of nonsense, really, and it is a load of nonsense, right? The next thing that Russians think is crazy is how people can get married, divorced really quickly, and take half the person's fortune. In Russia, the divorce laws are different, and so you only get half of what has been gained since you've been married and not before. And I think this is a really good thing, because in countries like the US, there's so many examples of people that get married, a couple of months later they get divorced, and the person that holds the wealth loses half the fortune. That's just mental, right? It's obvious that the person got married to get divorced so that they could get the fortune. And surely a judge can see that. But no, the law is the law. And I think that's insane, and Russian people think that's insane too. Although some girls might think, oh, I'm going to go to the US, get married, get divorced, and then move back home again with my fortune. Another thing that really annoys Russians and Russia is that countries in the West can decide who they want to invade and for what reason they want to do it, and it's completely fine, and there's no altercations, right? There's no fallout from that. They've decided that that country's bad. They've decided to take military action in that country, and that's that. And then life just carries on as normal. No sanctions, no problems, no arguments about it, whatever. And even if the reason afterwards has been proved to have been a lie, so what? There's no repercussions for that. It's completely fine, whatever. Life just carries on. And you'll see this, you know, in a lot of street interviews. They'll ask people in the UK, you know, what country should we go to war with next? And they're completely clueless. They don't even know who they've been to war with. They don't know who they're at war with. They have no idea, because their lives are not affected by their government's choice to act in the interests of the people. The US government and the British government, of course, they try to act in the interests of the people of the country. But if they do something which involves military action in another country, it doesn't negatively impact the people of that country, because so what? They're never punished for that. And so Russian people see it as a double standard and hypocrisy, that at the same time as criticizing Russia for taking responsibility for its actions and doing what it thinks is best for Russia and for the Russian people, at the same time they're punished for the decisions they make, whereas the other countries, they're never punished for the decisions that they make. So next, the Russian people don't understand why healthcare is so expensive in the US. They don't get it. Why? Why is it so expensive? At the same time, why is it so expensive to attend a university? They don't understand. Why should young people get into so much debt in order to receive an education and then have to pay extortionate amounts of money just to have a kid, or to travel in an ambulance, or have a scan if they feel something bad in their stomach and things like that? They don't understand it. They think it's ridiculous. Obviously the US is, you know, the capitalist country, right? It's all about business, but it should be about people too. And Russians don't understand why the US has all of these things that seem to go against the values of humanity, yet at the same time they preach their version of the world to the rest of the world as to how everyone else should behave. The next thing that Russians don't understand is the politically correct wording that you now have to use in the UK and the US and in Europe. They think it's funny. They think it's just stupid. I remember speaking to my Russian friends about a case in the UK where somebody named a cake in a shop a paradise cake, and somebody ate it and said, well, it's not like paradise to me, so I want to sue that person for it. And they just thought that's hilarious. And you know, it goes with a lot of things. Like, I like watching old episodes of Crime Watch UK. Now, if you're not from the UK, then Crime Watch UK was the kind of monthly show where they highlighted some of the most awful crimes that hadn't been solved, and so they would make a reconstruction of the crime and ask viewers to call in if they had any information. And if you go back to the 80s, you know, the wording is completely different. They'll say, you know, one witness will say, yeah, I saw like an ugly fat tramp sitting there and he scared me. Whereas now you have to say, I don't know what the word for homeless is now, but you'd say can you say ugly? Can you still say ugly? You have to say, I can't even think how I would describe that person without offending other people. I guess fat could be overweight, so it would be an overweight, not very handsome, homeless person. Is that how you describe them? I don't know, but Russian people just find it hilarious. Me as a person being tall, I received loads and loads of abuse growing up in the 80s and 90s because I was tall, and it was a normal thing. On a night out I'd get tons of abuse, and you know, I'd get called every name under the sun. And so I understand that it's nice, obviously, for people to be taught not to say mean words to people, but at the same time, like most things in the UK, it's gone completely out of control. One thing that Russian people find extremely strange and almost mentally ill, that's how they think of these people, is the promotion and propaganda of LGBT culture. The parades, the flags everywhere, all of this stuff in so many events in schools, the kids being taught so much about it. Russian people don't understand it at all. They just think these people must be insane to do that. They can't think of a reason why it should be done, because they see the world as like, well, I'm straight, for example. We don't have parades about me being straight. We don't have lessons teaching about it. We don't have, you know, celebrations and flags for people that are straight. So why do we need to do it for people that aren't? Why do we need all the celebrations? Why do we need all that stuff? If someone likes someone else, then just be with them. They don't understand the whole fuss about it. They don't understand why it's got to be advertised and also promoted, because obviously promotion, advertising influences young people to behave in a certain way, and they don't understand. They think, well, look, it should just be, you just do what you do, right? You get to your teenage years, you realize you like somebody, you like a certain, you know, whether that be a man or woman or whatever it is that, you know, different people are or feel that they like, or whatever they do, they just need to do themselves. They don't need to promote that and have days about it and have festivals and parties and flags and all of this stuff. Russian people just don't get it, like a lot of conservative countries around the world don't get it either. And then finally, the last thing that Russian people don't get about the US, about a lot of other countries, is their attitude towards drugs. We know that in the US, lots of people smoke weed. You can buy weed in supermarkets, especially for weed, right? They find it very strange because in Russia there's a zero tolerance policy towards drugs, and they just find it strange. A lot of people just think, oh, the Americans have found another way to make money. Okay, that was my points about Russian people, what they find strange about Americans and about foreigners. If you're Russian, let me know what you thought. Do you agree with the things I said? All of this has come from research and my knowledge of living in Russia and speaking to other Russian people about it. So I'd love to know your opinion. And if you're not Russian, let me know what you think too. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.